Hey everybody, it's Carm here. Coming to you on a beautiful Wednesday morning. Came out to do some yard work and I figured I'd get a little video in beforehand. I wanted to do another Touchstone album, talking about albums that have been pivotal in my own listening, introducing me to new styles and instrumentation approaches. And this is what I've been meaning to do for a while and just hadn't got around to before. And even though I've talked about the group, here and there, Mannheim Steamroller's debut, Fresh Aire, from 1975, an American gramophone. And I don't know, is anyone else a fan of dandelions? I think I'm the only person that I know of, at least when they look like this. But I was introduced to this album back in the summer of '91. We were by a friend of the family's house, old friend of my parents, and they're having kind of a party, kind of a summer party. And I think I might have been the only kid there. I was 15 going on 16. Actually, my little brother might have been there too. He was 10 years younger. But at some point, everyone had moved more towards the back of the house, and I was in the front room looking at some of the music they had cassettes and CDs. And she came in and said, you want to play anything, go right ahead. So the first thing that caught my eye was seeing this album on cassette. I had never heard of it before. The name looked a little familiar, but I was very intrigued by the cover. And when I put it on, it transported me into another realm. I mean, up to that point, it was pretty much electronic stuff that I'd been into, like Vangelis and the stuff that I hear on Star Streams, and even the contemporary jazz was usually synthesizer based in some way that I was into. And while there's some synthesizer on here, it seemed primarily acoustic. Lots of piano, some percussion and recorder. Chip Davis, who composes and arranges the music, is a drummer, and I hadn't really heard recorder on record before and played in that way. But it introduced to me just a much different blend that I had ever heard before. You could hear rock influence, you could hear jazz to some degree, although a great deal of classical, which I think was kind of the idea, a hybrid of classical and various modern areas of music, some really that are hard to define. And when I eventually got into the collection, looking for more of their stuff, they were one of the many groups that were, rather arbitrarily lumped into New Age, because really there was nowhere else to put them, really. But as soon as I put it on, I was really captivated. Starting with the first piece, Prelude, just acoustic piano, played it with an incredible stillness that I don't think I'd heard before, with lots of reverb, and it had a certain darkness to it, but not in a negative way, kind of a mysterioso aspect, which I'd already liked up to that point. Then the next piece, Chocolate Fudge, the whole group comes in. It's mainly Jackson Berkey on keyboards, electric acoustic piano, synthesizer, harpsichord, Eric Hansen on bass, and Chip Davis on drums, recorder, and other toys. The whole group comes in and plays this kind of it was really kind of a neat, almost like a jazz trio mixture of the classical and a little bit of rock. A great deal of variety and moods on the album, going from the happiest, most uplifting sounding sort of thing to something that's quite pensive and melancholy. The next piece is Interlude 1, which is something they did on subsequent albums, doing these very short vignettes, and mainly for solo piano, interspersed with nature sounds, rain and birds, and that was another thing that it introduced me to, which I had never really heard any albums with natural sounds mixed in, or just anything other than the music being played, maybe like field recordings and that sort of thing. And I really came to like the interludes. And then you have Sonata, which goes into more romantic territory and introduces some strings into they had a string section playing on there too, which is funny. At the time, when I was first getting into synthesizer music, I think I had assumed even at that time that they could do anything. Like they could play any acoustic sound, almost like a sampler. So I think I might have assumed for a while that that was actually a synthesizer, but it wasn't. It was actually a live string section. But then you have Interlude 2, which I believe this one is actually for electric piano. Goes into this really kind of neat stereo effect, kind of back and forth, kind of almost like a ringing feel to it. Very, very atmospheric and again, very kind of introspective sounding. Then you have Sarah's band. That's actually the piece that's playing right now. Give her a little bit. You have the recorder kind of playing in the lead with the harpsichord accompanying. Kind of sounds like a merry frolic dance or something, like people dancing around in a circle. Almost like a Renaissance fair kind of feel to it. Although at that time, as a kid hearing it, it was so different. Hearing that blend again at that time. I don't want to play this too loud because there might be a very possible copyright thing. And well, that's side 1. It ends with Sarah's band, and then side 2 starts with Fresh Air, which the harpsichord takes the lead and has almost like a dirge-like feel. Again, kind of going through the very, very wide variety of moods and styles that they've always gone through. And the next piece, Rondo, more it goes more up tempo and kind of like structured like a rondo, what that's considered to be. And then you have another interlude, again going back into kind of more slow, pensive solo piano. And Past the Keg is the next piece, which is more celebratory. I kind of like the title. It sounds like one really neat thing too. Another thing that it introduced me to was really seeing liner notes in a sense, or in this case, it's poetry that accompanies each piece. Basically going through somebody's lifetime, but going by month. So it starts off in January, ends with December, but it's going through a person's life, but it's being told from the viewpoint of a raindrop, which is really kind of neat. Another little fun thing of trivia, which I didn't know till years later, is that the fellow who writes the poetry, Bill Fries, is possibly better known as C.W. McCall, who did like Convoy and those sort of CB tribute records, I guess you could say, during the 70s. And I guess he had a connection with Chip Davis going back quite a while. In fact, I think Chip Davis and some of the members of the group had played on C.W. McCall's albums, but that's just a little something that, it was years later before I found that connection. Next up we have another interlude. And really the poetry really, it does kind of paint a nice picture of what you're hearing. Very evocative. Which I don't think they really did much on later albums. They did have accompanying notes with each song, but it wasn't the same fellow writing them, or the same approach. And then it ends with Mist, which brings back the string section. And this is probably the most melancholy and very kind of inward-looking song. It does have kind of like a finality to it, but still with like a kind of a hopefulness to it. But I've just enjoyed this album for so many years, and at times their music for some could be a little too saccharine, and maybe even rather corny. But I don't know. I still have that same feeling I had all those years ago hearing it. When it was really fresh and new, and especially with this debut album, I don't think I've heard anything else that really, maybe the exception of certain library music or that I heard much later on. But I don't know, I'd say they were really pretty pioneering, and just in the way they blended different styles and instrumentation, and if you want to call it aesthetics, just something that was very different. And again, being from 1975, it was recorded really well. Another thing is they were really cutting edge when it came to studio technology, just making it sound as clear and crisp as possible for that time. And again, with this kind of blended instrumentation, that's must have been a real challenge. So yeah, again, like so many of these others that I show, I feel like there's so much I could say, but probably haven't said much of anything. But if you, and I think a lot of people are familiar with Mannheim Steamroller through their Christmas albums, probably most of all. But if you're not familiar with the debut, I mean, this is where it started, the group as a whole. And I definitely recommend checking it out if you're not familiar. If you haven't heard anything by them, it could be different than, whatever you're into. This could be just another, kind of add another branch to, just something new. So, yeah. Fresh Aire by Mannheim Steamroller. Something that still stayed with me all these years. And I was just talking with Gary actually yesterday. He just put up another Tales from the Garage, which I'm really glad to see him on a lot more now. He was talking about classical music, how he tends to favor more acoustic in general and classical stuff in the warmer months. And I find that's been my tendency too, that we share. And I think a lot of it has its origins for me in this album. I hearing this in the summer, I'd always associated this with the warmer months. And plus being like the first primarily acoustic-based music I'd really gotten into, that led the way as well. So it's a touchstone in many different respects. So I'll definitely check it out. So yeah, that'll do it for now. And we get back to the art and take on the growth. Things are starting to come in now, and gotta tame it just somewhat. But I'm looking forward to getting more into it. So yeah, I'll try to come back on, if not by the end of the week, maybe after the weekend, and see what comes next. So hope you're all well where you're at. Till the next one. Peace, love, and joy.